Did I do something wrong with the authentication? It's not showing up.
All right, it's live now.
Is it? Okay, cool. Now it says live. All right, so I'll just go to the channel. You can grab the link and tweet it out.
Yeah.
I'm going to do the same thing. That's an annoying sound. All right, and then I got to throw this link into the RotoViz Live page. All right, let's get it going here. 2 minutes, I guess. We'll get started in just a minute. All right, just under a minute.
You want to jump into it?
Yes, sir. Let's get going.
All right. Obviously, welcome everybody. Thanks for jumping in with us. As always, you can get the 30% viewer discount at rotoviz.com/podcast. You can see that right there on your screen. If you're not a RotoViz subscriber yet, great way to get discounted access to all of the content that we produce. But as far as this morning's DFS news and information and things that have changed since Thursday, one of the big things we wanted to discuss was Derek Carr's finger. We wanted to get a little more information on that. And Nick, you had a couple thoughts on that. You want to jump into that real quick?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like Derek Carr, his finger is fine. He practiced in full without a glove, no issues. So it sounds like he's, full go this week, 100%. I don't know if he'll actually be 100%, but it sounds like he'll be pretty close to it, if not 100%. So I don't think that really changes much in how you would use Derek Carr this weekend. I'm still not really using him. And I think the other thing that we talked about is how it affects Latavius Murray. We thought maybe if he was a little bit limited with that finger, then they could rely heavily on Latavius Murray. So both Ben and I played him, Latavius Murray, in our Play of the Week call over at the RotoViz Play of the Week. And I still don't hate some exposure to Latavius Murray. He's going to be far too under-owned for what he has the potential to do in this game. with Derek Carr being healthy, it does make it more likely that this game does shoot out, which I think a lot of people in the industry thought it could shoot out. So if it shoots out, why not get some exposure to the goal line back in that game? So I still think it's okay to have some exposure to Latavius Murray, but I probably won't go as heavy on him as I might have otherwise had Carr's finger been a little bit more limited. What do you think, Ben?
Yeah, same thing. I mean, pretty much ditto that. Still think Murray has a good or an underrated touchdown projection. The Bills tend to give up a pretty high percentage of their scores through rushing TDs. They've actually given up 13 rushing TDs and 13 passing TDs. Even most teams give up significantly more passing TDs. I think there's only 3 or 4 teams that are even or have given up more rushing TDs than passing TDs. So, like you said, if Carr's finger makes the offense more efficient and gets them down towards the red zone more frequently, and this game does have a pretty high team total or game total, and then obviously with Oakland being favored, yeah, I mean, that could obviously lead to some red zone carries for Murray. So I think there is some potential for him to hit maybe 2 touchdowns, which makes him a pretty good GPP play. I don't think he's he's certainly not in play for cash, and he's not, somebody that I'm going to be all over, but I still think he has plenty of upside this week.
Yeah, I totally agree. So as far as that game in general goes, I probably won't have too much exposure to it. I do like Amari Cooper. I still think he's going to be far too under-owned this week because of some recency bias issues there with him not performing well last week. Sammy Watkins is in play. Actually, some of the Buffalo players are in play. I think you can play Tyrod Taylor in a GPP. You can stack him with Clay or Sammy Watkins. And then I really like LaShawn McCoy. I think people are going to try to pay up for either David Johnson or Le'Veon Bell, possibly both even in some cases. And so I think that'll make LaShawn McCoy go under-owned as well. So I like LaShawn McCoy kind of as a sneaky GPP play as well.
Yeah, I think he's in a good spot as well. Question in the chat here with Mike Pouncey, Laramie Tunzel, and Brandon Albert out. Is Ajayi still looking like as good of a play? That might be a callback to last week. I think we mentioned that Ajayi was a decent play last week. So sorry if you were on him last week. I'm not playing him this week. Baltimore's run D is extremely good. Not a situation that I want a lot of exposure to Ajayi.
Yeah, I don't have any Ajayi this week. I don't think it's worth using him in GPPs or cash games at all this week. That offensive line is banged up. We saw how it didn't work out well for him, and the matchup is even harder this week than it was last week. So a lot of
good running back plays at the upper end. So
yep, I agree. Even Melvin Gordon's a good play up there. LaShawn McCoy. I like Spencer Ware at 6,400. So there's a lot of good expensive guys. I don't think you have to jam Ajayi in there because it just doesn't really make sense with all the decimation going on in his offensive line there.
Totally agree. A situation I'm watching this morning pretty closely from my cash lineups is the Marvin Jones news that, it sounded yesterday like he wasn't going to play. And this morning, it sounds like they're going to test it out. For me, I think it makes Anquan Boldin cash game viable. And I haven't really seen that a lot. I've seen a lot of comments like, oh, Boldin is in play now. I think he's pretty squarely in play. He's extremely cheap at 4,100 in a great matchup. He's coming off 2 straight 9-target games. Anquan Boldin, yeah, he's 36 years old, but was a very, very good receiver in his prime. Clearly has still been pretty effective this year, and Stafford has developed a little bit of a rapport with him. I mean, that's kind of the key for me is as Marvin Jones has seen less and less work through the middle of this season, a guy that has been a huge cause of that has been Boldin, who he's not a big play guy. He's clearly somebody that Stafford looks at in key spots, looks at in the red zone, huge red zone target in terms of, or he's seen a ton of red zone targets at least. So for me, I mean, I'm looking at him going, okay, he's at 4,100. He's got 9 targets 2 weeks in a row. Now Marvin Jones might be out. It's a great matchup. We all love the spot. And he gets the red zone. He's pretty much the first option in the offense in the red zone. I mean, what's not to like there? I think that's a perfect cash game play.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I'm definitely waiting on this Marvin Jones news because I've created a lot of lineups with him with the intention of global swapping to Anquan Boldin if that's the case. So I totally agree with you. I think Anquan Boldin, you can play him in GPP, you can play him in cash if Marvin Jones is out. He could see another 9 targets in a game where there is some upside for Detroit in this game, and I think we should talk about this game in general, but I wrote an article at RotoViz about how I think, there's an underrated potential for it to be a blowout in the Saints' favor. But I think in that case, you still have Detroit throwing the ball a lot. So there's going to be a ton of passing volume for Detroit this week. And that just makes for some of these receivers to be very good plays in Detroit. Anquan Bolden. I liked Marvin Jones the best out of all of them before, as the week started, before all this injury news kind of came up, and it sounded like he would be more and more questionable and then possibly out as the week went on. So I was on Marvin Jones, but now I think Anquan Bolden, for his price and for the amount of volume he should see, is a really great play. Theo Riddick, I think, is a must play in cash games for me because he's just going to get so much volume, and he's script independent almost. I mean, the only script that Theo Riddick probably won't get a lot of volume is if Detroit blows out New Orleans, but that's probably a 2% chance of happening in New Orleans. So especially with the way the matchups work. So I think Theo Riddick is just a fantastic play on the Detroit side. What are your thoughts on the Detroit side before we flip over to the New Orleans side?
I agree with you. I think Riddick's a fantastic play. I don't currently have him in cash because there's been so much wide receiver value that's opened up that I've found a way to jam both Le'Veon Bell and David Johnson into my lineup, and I'm comfortable with it. I like Marquise Wilson. I like Anquan Bolden. I like Tyreek Hill. We talked on Thursday about not really liking him, but now that Macklin's out, and obviously with the struggles for Atlanta's defense to defend the short passing game, particularly, they've given up, I think, 12 more receptions to running backs than any other defense in the NFL. Their DVOA against the short part of the field is 23rd in the league. That's where Tyreek Hill is going to get used. He's not a running back, obviously, but I think with Macklin out, should see plenty of targets, plenty of volume. I think those guys are all pretty stable. And Dorial Green-Beckham's another one with Jordan Matthews out. I think that has pretty stable target projection. I mean, he's not really competing with anybody outside of Zach Ertz for targets. So I don't really see how he doesn't hit, 6-7 targets at min salary. I mean, I don't love all those plays, but if it means you can get the really, really high floor and really high ceilings of both Le'Veon Bell and David Johnson in your lineup, I think you can lock those two guys in for almost 50 points. I mean, I think their floors really approach 20 points. And even if one of them only hits like 18 to 20 points between Bell and Johnson, there's a really high likelihood the other one, not a really high likelihood, but there's still a likelihood the other one is approaching 30 points. So I think if you look at the different I guess the different outcomes that could play out by having both those guys in your lineup, it's tough to imagine that they don't hit close to 50 points between the two of them. And for me, that stability then and they still have upside from that. And that stability allows me to be willing to go really cheap at receiver. So that's kind of where I'm at right now. But I agree with you. I think Riddick's a really strong play. It's just not somebody that I'm on with my current construction.
Makes sense. And there's some other good cheap running backs as well. I mean, Jeremy Hill at 4,300, Riddick at 5,800 we talked about. So even James Starks potentially in cash games is in play. But if you're taking the too expensive running back strategy, then it makes sense that you wouldn't be on them. But I think there's a lot of different ways to go in cash games this week. On the New Orleans side, I think it really seems like Detroit is a much better defense on the outsides, on the perimeter of the defense. With Darius Slay, of course, being on one side. And then I forget who it is on the other side real quick. Oh, Nevin Lawson, of course, who's actually been, even in my opinion, has been better than Slay this year. So they'll be locking down the outsides. Willie Snead plays in the slot on 76% of his snaps, and then Brandon Cooks plays about a third of his snaps in the slot. So they could get some exposure to Quandre Diggs, who's just terrible. And then Detroit's also bad against the tight end position. So it really seems like over the middle of the field, which is kind of the opposite of what I talked about last week with the 49ers, where they're good on the inside of the field and weak on the perimeter. This is like the opposite. Detroit struggles over the middle. So I think the tight ends are in play. I did write about fading Josh Hill because I just think his ownership is going to be too high. And I think he's definitely got volatility, which means there's a lot of downside for his ownership level. So I think I like Fleener a bit better than Josh Hill. Both have the potential to get a touchdown. I just like, from a theory perspective, I like Fleener better than Hill. And then I really, really, really like Willie Snead this week. He's 5,100. He's got just an awesome matchup over the middle. Brandon Cooks is certainly in play. Obviously with that 0 target game last week, but I don't think he's a must start. He can always take one to the house though. And then Michael Thomas is just a hoss, but he has the toughest matchup of them. So I'll probably be underweight on Michael Thomas, and I'll probably be overweight on Snead. And because I think Brandon Cooks could go pretty under-owned because of what happened last week, I'll probably be a little bit overweight on Brandon Cooks just because I think he'll be too under-owned. So if he ends up going higher owned than I think, then I'll probably be about even with the field.
I agree with you on Cooks. He's obviously a great play this week coming off that donut. I think a lot of people have touted him this week as, don't overreact to that donut. So a little bit of the contrarian appeal might be lost, but I still think he's a pretty phenomenal play because for what, the squeaky wheel narrative, if you will. I do think that they'll design some plays to get him the ball. There's been a lot of talk this week. This morning we saw that Rappaport tweeted out that the Saints might look to trade Brandon Cooks or test the trade market in the offseason. Somebody with, just some random Twitter person follower responded that, he hadn't done his research or something to that effect. And Sean Payton retweeted that response this morning. So I think that's kind of interesting. To me, it seems like a situation where they're going to do their best to get Cooks involved, obviously not at the expense of, game planning appropriately, but I think he's a strong play this week in a bounce back spot as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then real quick, we also failed to mention Eric Ebron. I think Ebron is going to be way too high owned for the situation here. So, we do like high team total, and if this game shoots out, then certainly Ebron's in play. So you can have some exposure to him, but I think that 21 to 25% Fantasy Labs projections for ownership, that means he'll probably be up in that 15+% range at least. So I think that's way too high for Ebron, which means I'll be underweight on him. And for me personally, if I'm going to be that far underweight on him, I'm just going to have none of them. So I have no Eric Ebron this week. I just don't like the situation. There's a lot of downside in this game for Detroit. So, or there's more, I think, than people realize. So I'm not going to be on Ebron. And then we also haven't mentioned the Saints running backs. So, Detroit does struggle very much against the running, both on the ground and to pass catching running backs. So I think both running backs for the Saints the Saints running backs are in play. So it just kind of remains to be seen if I will use any of them, just because I like so many other running backs this week. It'll be hard for me to fit a lot of Mark Ingram in there. It'll be hard for me to fit any sort of Hightower in there as well. I don't know if you even get much usage this week. So that's kind of what we think of this game.
Yeah, I think Hightower should see some usage though. I've been getting him in as the cheaper of the two backs into a couple GPPs. But I agree with you. It's tough to fit either of those guys in with so many good running back plays this week. But yeah, I'm pretty much with you on the rest of that too. The question I wanted to throw you on Ebron, I hear you about him being too high owned for tournaments probably. Would you play him in cash, or are you considering him in cash?
Working my microphone there. No, not at all. I wouldn't consider him in cash. I wouldn't play him in cash. I think there's too much downside, and I don't like downside in cash. I want a high floor. I think Travis Kelce has a really high floor. And then, I think there's probably Kelce is my favorite tight end play this week, pretty easily for me. I don't see much downside with Kelce. I mean, with Macklin out, he has seen a boost in targets. I know we talked on the Daily Show earlier this week. I wasn't sure. Didn't seem like he had much of a boost in targets, but it turns out he actually has seen about a 2-target boost since Macklin's been out and Macklin's ruled out again. So I really like Travis Kelce. I think Jimmy Graham's in play, but for an $800 discount on DraftKings to Graham, I would just much rather go with Kelce. Atlanta is dead last against the tight end in like everything. They're just horrible against the tight end. And you've got Travis Kelce who will be seeing a huge increase in targets.
The one thing that they are decent in, they are in all the fantasy production metrics for sure, but their DVOA is all right. I think it's like 11th or something, which I thought was kind of interesting. If Kelce is the focal point of the defense, who knows if they're able to actually shut him down and limit that a little bit better than they have in other games. But
yeah, it's 11th, but the volume is much more stable and predictive, and they allow the most targets per game to the tight end position at 9.3. They allow the most yardage to the tight end position, or not the most yardage, up there in the most yardage. That's because they are a little more efficient on a per target basis, but they still allow almost 60 yards per game to the tight end position, and that's all tight ends. So I mean, if you think like Travis Kelce is better than the average tight end, he could just have a truly monster game. And they also allow a lot of touchdowns to the tight end position.
Yeah, don't fault the logic at all. The question in the chat here is, can you be on Kelce and Hill in cash together on the road in Atlanta? That's part of the reason that I've kind of talked myself down on Kelce a little bit, is that I really like Hill in cash.
Jeremy Hill or
Tyreek Hill? Then you
Tyreek Hill. Or I was like Josh Hill, Jeremy Hill, or Tyreek Hill.
You'd end up with the two top passing options in the Chiefs offense. I don't know if I really want the two top passing options.
I'd rather have Kelce than Tyreek. But for $100 difference, I think Kelce is the better play.
Yeah, I don't necessarily disagree, but you probably wouldn't have both, right?
I probably wouldn't have both. I was looking at trying to construct a lineup, and looking at the two of them together kind of made sense in a way, but you basically capture like all the receiving game work there, right, if you do that. So it's not horrible. It limits your upside more than it limits your floor.
Yeah, agreed. And actually, I said I wouldn't necessarily disagree. I think I would take Hill actually as a better play.
I would take Kelce.
And then I said I didn't disagree. So
I'll take Kelce, and we'll see. That'll be fun. That'd be a good bet to have against each other for like a beer next time I come up to Seattle.
All right, sounds good. What else do we got for? It looks like Devontae Parker is going to play. I don't know if that adjusts anything. I'm not on the Dolphins offense.
Nope, me either. I don't think I have a single Dolphin at all in any of my lineups.
And I'm fine with that. I mean, I agree with that. I'm really kind of off that game entirely. I don't really have a lot of Ravens. I think I have a little bit of Mike Wallace.
I have some Dolphins and Ravens defenses, I think.
That's a good play. Yeah.
But that's it.
Makes sense. Who are your favorite defenses this week? You got any big?
Yeah, actually I do. That's a really good question because I was, we do this play of the week every week at RotoViz where we use Fantasy Labs, tools and things like that. So shout out to Fantasy Labs there for sponsoring the contest. And so I was looking at a trend on Fantasy Labs when I was trying to do this contest for my defense, and I found an interesting trend where one thing that Jonathan Bales likes to do, one of the co-founders of Fantasy Labs, is he likes to use defenses in high-scoring games. And we've talked about this a few times before if you've been following on the Daily DFS or our live shows. And he actually just won a qualifier using this strategy. So I looked at high total games. So I picked games that were, I think it was like above 48 points or something. And then I looked at games that would be where the defense was either a favorite or a slight underdog by like less than 3 points, so by less than a field goal. And then I also looked at a couple other things like if they're a bargain and different things like that. And I found two defenses that really stood out. And this cohort as a whole had a plus minus. Fantasy Labs proprietary metric had a plus minus of almost 2, which for a defense is crazy to get a plus minus of 2 on any trend. So it was 50 total defenses that had seen this, and their ownership percentage is like 2%. So it's a really high upside play to do exactly what Bales is doing, because in high scoring games, you tend not to pick people. The crowd tends not to pick these defenses because it's going to be high scoring, and they're afraid of that. But it actually creates a lot of touchdown upside, turnover upside, sack upside. So the two defenses are the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Arizona Cardinals that really stood out. Atlanta also kind of stands out a little bit, but I'm pretty heavy on some of these Kansas City players, so I decided not to go the Atlanta route. But the two that definitely stand out are the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Arizona Cardinals. So I've been jamming them into a lot of my lineups this week, and it's great because you can stack the Steelers defense with Le'Veon Bell, or you can stack the Cardinals defense with David Johnson. So it works out perfect that it's those two defenses as well that go with those two expensive running backs.
I like it. That's good stuff. A couple other ones I'm on are both the D's in the Denver-Jacksonville game. If you have enough salary, I think Denver could be a really good play this week against Bortles. I think it was Scott Barrett tweeted out earlier this week that Bortles takes or is poor under pressure and Denver blitzes more than any team in the league, something to that effect. And we already know Denver's a really strong defense.
I just think they're going to be so highly owned that it's not worth it. I would much rather have the salary in a week where there's a lot of good expensive options at every position.
Fair enough. Yeah. I mean, I was thinking that with the good expensive options at a lot of positions, that a lot of people might not pay up for D. But then on the other side, you also have the Jaguars D going up against Paxton Lynch, which I think is a good spot as well. You got a rookie quarterback there. But I really like your calls on the Cardinals and Steelers. I'm going to go get some exposure to that after we're done here. Any thoughts on Doug Martin in GPPs? I really like him. I think he's a really good GPP play. What about you?
I actually think he's a terrible GPP play. I think a lot of people will be on him. I think he's another one of those running backs that could be pretty highly owned, and I just think there's some other running backs that are much better situations. And you can get like LaShawn McCoy for 5% ownership versus Doug Martin at 10 to 15% ownership. I think I'd rather have LaShawn McCoy. So, and I know they're not. I know they're different price, but what I'm saying is like I would just rather find a different roster construction.
Okay. Yeah, I actually really like him at his price point. I don't know that he's going to be that high owned, but maybe I'm missing where he's been kind of popular, talked about this week. But
yeah, I've heard a lot about him. If you listen to some different podcasts, I heard him on the Fantasy Labs podcast. I've seen him in a couple articles. I think one was on Pro Football Focus or something like that. So there's definitely been some Doug Martin talk this week.
Fair enough. Yeah. I like him because I think he's going to have a little bit higher receiving game involvement against the Chargers, who give up a lot of passes to running backs. So I think that he has.
Yeah, that's definitely possible. I love, actually, you and I were talking about this on our Slack chat. I love this game, especially, I think this game, Tampa Bay, San Diego, could go over. When you do your gambling line article, the betting lines article, I noticed that both San Diego and Tampa Bay were in the top 10 in expected points from the pass, and then if you use the one method, and then if you use the other method that you have, they're both in the top 7. So I think this game could definitely shoot out. It has shootout potential, and in that case, of course, all the Tampa Bay offenses in play, all the San Diego offenses in play. I mean, there aren't really any super tough matchups in this game from the defense perspective. So I think it's interesting. I don't know if Tyrell Williams will probably play, it sounds like, but I don't know how useful he'll be. I was kind of hoping secretly that he would be out, not for him, but from a fantasy perspective, so that I could use a lot of Travis Benjamin. I think that Travis Benjamin is going to go way under owned. I think he could go under owned anyway. But even with Tyrell Williams out, I think his ownership would have come up a little, but I still think it would have been too far under owned. So I really like this game a lot. So I've been trying to get them some stacks there. I like the Tampa Bay side a little bit better. I think Jameis Winston is probably a better GPP play than Rivers just because of salary. And then I like stacking him with Mike Evans better because you have confidence that Mike Evans is the go-to guy there. Whereas in San Diego, we don't really know who it'll be this week.
Yeah. I agree with you, though, about Benjamin being really interesting. He just came back last week from missing some time. Didn't play really a full complement of snaps, but he played quite a few snaps. I think he played in the 70s in terms of percentage. I know Inman led the team in snaps at wide receiver, and Tyrell Williams played just under that. He played almost a full complement of snaps, considering that he left the game for a little bit. He was definitely right back in there. Mm-hmm. But I think if his snaps are limited at all this week, you could see Benjamin get closer to the full slate of snaps and more involvement. We've seen his upside already earlier this year, so I really like him as a contributor as well. I think he's interesting.
Cool. Hey, we have a hashtag question here from the hashtag RotoViz Live on Twitter. It's from BGully83. So, with the absence of Jordan Reed, do you like Garcon or Crowder more?
I think I like Crowder a little bit more, but I'm kind of biased against Garcon. I want to hear your thoughts on that. Who do you got?
It's Garcon for me. It's actually, I think it's not that close, but that's to be debated. So you've got Deshaun Jackson will be probably man marked by Patrick Peterson. And then Jamison Crowder's in the slot where you'll see a lot of Tyrann Mathieu. He's been kind of a boomer bust play this year. He hasn't allowed a lot of targets, but the targets he has allowed have tended to go for big plays. I don't know if Crowder just doesn't seem like a big play guy. I mean, he doesn't seem like a deep threat. He can be occasionally. I'm a Redskins fan, so I watch every game. And he just seems more like a consistent guy who can get down the field for like 10, 15-yard chunks, kind of like Pierre Garçon, but he does it in the slot. So I think I would much rather go with Pierre Garçon. He's on the outside. He's got Marcus Cooper, which is just like the nuts matchup. We saw what Tyler Gabriel did last week against Cooper. So it's just the same situation where you leverage off of the top option in the pass game, which in this case is Deshaun Jackson. Now that Reed's out, you leverage off it with the other out wide receiver. So that's Pierre Garçon. So that's the direction I would tend to go this week with the Redskins, and you get the salary savings with Garçon relative to Crowder.
Fair enough. I got another comment here that says, I'm loving Garçon this week, and I need you guys to help talk me off of him.
I have no Garçon. I have zero Garçon. So that said, I think he's the better play. Answering the question is Reed or Crowder, or is Crowder or Garçon the better play? I think Garçon's the better play. I just don't have any of them. So if that helps talk you down, that at least I don't have any of them, even though I like him as the better play. That it's just I think he's the better play. I don't necessarily think he's a fantastic play because I just don't like the Redskins' offense this week much.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think that's the key point there. If their offense struggles. I'm not really on their passing game weapons either.
Now that said, they probably will trail. I don't expect them to win this game, and they're on the road, so they could be throwing a lot, and that means Garçon could be a good volume play. He's an interesting cash game play, actually. I think.
Fair enough. I wouldn't be on him in cash personally. I like a lot of the other cheap wide receivers better, but I got a question about who our cash game QB is looking like, and then the question after was Stafford. Stafford's not in play for me. I'm going with Breeze. I have found a way to roll out Breeze and both running backs, and I'm pretty happy with that build. So I don't know. What about you guys?
What was the question again?
Favorite cash game, or what your cash game QB is looking like?
It's either going to be Breeze for me or it's going to be Alex Smith. And I'm still debating between two cash game rosters. I love Kansas City this week. I have no idea. I'm playing them a lot in the Millie. I'm playing a lot in qualifiers. I'm playing them a lot in different GPPs, some of the expensive GPPs even, because I don't think he'll be highly owned. And he also won't be highly owned in cash, but I think he has the chance to put up a really big game against Atlanta. They should be throwing a lot more than they normally need to. It's in the Dome. Atlanta struggles on defense just in general. So I think this is an interesting situation for Alex Smith. He's only 5,400, so if he gets you like 18 points, you're happy with him in cash games. We would, and I think he has upside for 25 this week at least. So I think Alex Smith is a very, very interesting GPP play, and I would even consider using him in cash. I don't think he actually has that low of a floor this week because they're going to have to. I mean, it seems like to me, I think the only plausible outcome where he kind of gets a low floor is if like Kansas City's defense takes over. But Matt Ryan's been so good this year. This Atlanta offense has been just firing on all cylinders this year. I think that's a low probability scenario.
Fair enough.
But I'll probably use Breeze.
There's a lot of good quarterbacks. I'm not really on Alex Smith, but I think you make a good case for him. The next question is favorite GPP QBs, and I think that's a great question. There are a lot out there. I'm actually, because there are so many, and I've seen a lot of different quarterbacks mentioned. I think I probably have the most Breeze, and I know that's kind of sounds chalky, but I'm differentiating elsewhere because I just think he's going to end up being lower owned than he should be. He's still going to be really highly owned, but this is a really phenomenal matchup. Pretty much everything I've looked at lines up for him to be in a great spot to hit both 300 passing yards to get that bonus and hit multiple touchdowns. So I'm willing to put my money on that, and that's what I want to be on. And
I agree. I have a lot of Breeze. He's my favorite GPP quarterback. I think that's just the best call.
Right. Yeah. And it's just interesting because there's so many other good options. People are looking at guys like Carr. They're looking at Ben Roethlisberger. They're looking at Stafford. They're looking at Kaepernick. Aaron Rodgers is cheap. Russell Wilson is cheap. I do have some Wilson. I mean,
I have a lot of Wilson. Yeah. So who are your favorite besides Breeze? Like if you had to pick maybe two others.
I took Wilson in a few because he's on Sunday night, and I just maybe see about the Sunday night hammer. I also really like Jimmy Graham. I like that they're back at home.
Yeah.
that they have some potential to get going a little bit in the passing offense this week. Rawls hasn't been running well. Carolina's got a good run defense, so I think that they'll lean on the passing game a little bit.
I agree.
I've been going with him a little bit.
Cool. So my two, obviously one is Alex Smith. I have a lot of Russell Wilson actually, so I will give another one. That's going to be Jameis Winston. I also have exposure. I'll just tell you who I have exposure to: Aaron Rodgers, Ben Roethlisberger, some Phillip Rivers. Not much. I have a little bit of Phillip Rivers. Like I said, I like the Jameis side more in this game. And I said Big Ben. Yeah, I think that's. I think I have a little bit of Barkley maybe. I kind of generated some lineups using the optimizer at RotoViz. So I think I got a few Barkley lineups in there. Yeah, I have a smattering of Barkley, and I have a smattering of Tyrod and a smattering of Kaepernick. So that's my exposure right there. It is. There's a lot of good plays this week. But, I mean, I'm really heavy on Drew Brees, Russell Wilson, Alex Smith, and Jameis Winston. I think those are probably my 4 highest exposures. Good
stuff. Any other questions on the hashtag? Or
not right now. I wanted to get your thoughts on these weather situations with the snow in Green Bay, the potential for snow. It's snowing right now in Chicago, but it sounds like it'll be flurries by game time. They're both going to be low winds, though, like 6-7 mile an hour wind games. So what do you think about, does it affect your strategy around either of these games in terms of cash or GPPs?
Yeah, I mean, looking at it, and we were just discussing it before we came on, it had me a little bit concerned about Marquise Wilson and cash. I mean, he's already he's a good play, but he's a little bit optimistic to playing cash already. He's only had really one strong game, which was last week. And I think what it did for me, the Chicago game primarily, is it reinforced how good of a play Jordan Howard is this week. I think he's been talked up plenty, but I think he still is going to go a little bit under the radar because there are a lot of running backs to talk about. And Howard has just a phenomenal matchup, and especially if it's a weather situation where he gets 25 carries because they're just focusing on playing through the ground, then I mean I think that's perfect. That's a really good spot against San Fran's rush defense. That's going to pay off in my opinion. So I think that reinforces Howard as being a really strong play this week. I'm kind of staying off the Green Bay Houston game. I know people are interested in Hopkins or Fuller as contrarian plays. I don't want to bank on Osweiler turning it or figuring it out this week on the road in bad weather now too. I mean, I know the weather's not a horrible detriment, or at least snow's not. Wind is the bigger detriment, right, in the aggregate. But I don't necessarily think that that's a positive sign for a guy who is already struggling to kind of turn it on in Osweiler. I think you can still go with Rodgers. Fine, I'm fine with that.
Yeah, I actually don't think it really concerns me too much in either game. I do think it makes Jordan Howard an even stronger play. It makes James Starks probably a little bit stronger of a play as well. So those are interesting situations, but I don't think it really affects Osweiler. I mean, I'm not using him anyway. He's terrible. But I do think I do think there is some occasion to use, if you think Green Bay is going to move the ball a lot, there's some occasion to use a kind of a comeback play, whether it be Fuller or Fedorowicz or Hopkins. They're all GPP eligible. My favorite is Fuller this week because of the matchup. So that's where I've been getting a little bit of exposure to the Houston offense is usually through Will Fuller. I think I might have a lineup there too with Hopkins and Fedorowicz.
I had a little bit of Fuller too, but I was taking him out this morning because of the weather. So you might totally be right there. And like we said, the trends in the aggregate are that snow is not as much of an impact on the passing game as wind. So I might just be a little bit pessimistic there. I want to get your take on Marquise Wilson, though. What are your thoughts on him?
Yeah, I mean, he's also got a really good matchup. This game could actually go over their total because both defenses are so bad. I think he's a fine play. If they pass the ball a lot, he's not like a super deep threat. So I think he's got some goal line usage even before as well. So yeah, I think he's fine in cash games. I still like Marquise Wilson. I don't mind using receivers from this game. I like Cameron Meredith as well. I think he's a little bit more of he gets his he gets his yards in chunks, which I think could potentially hurt a little more in a snow game. But he still has the potential for massive games. So, yeah, I think both of these receivers are good options.
Who do you prefer if you had to choose one?
Oh, that's tough. I probably prefer Marquise Wilson, but I kind of like Meredith from a GPP perspective because I think he'll be lower owned. So I think Wilson outscores Meredith, but I like from the theory perspective, I think they're both really close.
Fair enough.
Cheapest
you want to run GPPs, Dion. I actually really like Dion this week as a GPP play, and I am considering him. We know Brady's still a little bit hobbled. Like he seems healthy, but he's had some swelling in his knee. But he's been throwing to the running backs a ton the last couple of weeks. Both Dion and White have been getting plenty of targets. And I don't know if that's just kind of a crutch because he wants to get the ball out quick or what it is, but I think it's interesting, especially with Gronk out now, and the potential for Bennett to maybe use him in some blocking situations. Bennett's still a good play as well, but I think that those running backs could get an uptick in targets, and Deion Lewis's playing time's obviously ticked up in his first 2 weeks. I think he could get a little more playing time. They could also blow out LA and rest him a little bit.
Yeah, and LA is pretty good against pass catching backs. So I'm not on Deion Lewis, but I think it's an interesting call because maybe nobody will be on him, and if he does do something, then you're definitely at a huge advantage.
Mm-hmm. Sorry. It's not ideal for pass catching backs, but my theory is just that the Patriots can scheme to get their running backs the ball potentially. Yeah. And that was just kind of where I was talking myself into him being a viable play at 3,800. It's just a really good price. Are there any other
I got one on the hashtag here.
Okay.
And this is actually a perfect question for you. Is it viable to jam both Le'Veon Bell and DJ in a cash lineup?
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, I was mentioning that earlier. I think it's very viable. I have a Breeze, Le'Veon, David Johnson lineup right now because I think you can go with Tyreek. I think you can go with Anquan Bolden, we talked about earlier in the show. I think you can go with Marquise Wilson. I think you can go with Dorial Green-Beckham at minimum price. And if you are willing to go really low price at all your receiver spots and basically just hope that they average about 10 points a person, you can get both the top running backs in. And like I said, I would project them more times than not to break 50 between the two of them. And then you have, like a Drew Brees at quarterback who I expect to hit 25 or more points. It's not that difficult to get up to 140 or 150 when you jam those guys in if you start trying to break it down and analyze it out and do the different projections on it. And I think there's enough value and I have enough comfort in the target volume for those low-priced receivers that I just listed that I think it's very viable.
I've got a thought here. I was just kind of looking at my cash game lineup, and this is not for cash game. This is for GPP. But if Marvin Jones is out or severely limited, the guy who comes and fills in for him, and it seems like is going to be Andre Roberts. He gets the best matchup then if he plays the Marvin Jones role. I don't think they're actually that similar. I don't think they're actually that similar players, but the matchup is still very good. Delvin Breaux on the outside there is just so bad. So if Andre Roberts comes in at 3,000 in a game they're going to be throwing a ton, I think he's like a GPP flyer for sure.
Interesting. Yeah, he's been getting a few targets. I
definitely noticed on the Thanksgiving game he got some targets.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, 6 targets over the last 4 games.
6 over the last 3, yeah.
Yeah, excuse me, 3 games, yeah. 4 catches and he's a 44-yard catch, 27-yard catch. All right, yeah, I could buy that.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, just a GPP flyer, 2% exposure when he's probably going to have 0.5% exposure, that just kind of thing.
Too. So
what was that?
Marvin Jones is confirmed inactive.
Inactive. All right. So
we got the active inactive reports coming out. Jaguars, TJ Yeldon active. What's your thought with Denard Robinson and Yeldon?
With Yeldon and Denard, who's inactive?
No, Yeldon is active.
Oh, is active.
Yeah.
I can't. You can't really use any of these guys against Denver. Denver is funny because they do allow yards or they do allow points to the running back position, but it's usually from high-powered offenses. Atlanta, San Diego, these types of offenses that have moved the ball a lot this year, and whose backs are part of both facets of the game, pass catching and rushing. So Kansas City didn't really do much because they're not really a high-powered offense. So Spencer Ware didn't have a very good game. So I don't think Jacksonville's a very high-powered offense these days with the way Bortles is playing. So I don't think you can really use any of these backs, especially because they're not getting the full workload. So I think it's really more for high-powered, really much more for high-powered backs that or backs that are on high-powered offenses.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great call. The offensive efficiency is going to obviously impact the running back's ability to put up good numbers. And if Broncos just completely stymie the Jaguars, you're not going to get good numbers from either of these guys. They're splitting the work anyway. I think that's, from a kind of a macro level viewpoint of the game, that's the most likely outcome is that the Jaguars just don't move the ball real well. So looking at the matchup against the position itself and saying that these are great plays is probably not the right way to do it. I think that's a great call. Great way to look at that. You got Aaron Rodgers active, Eddie Royal inactive. None of that's really that surprising.
Right. Cool. So, yeah, I mean, Andre Robertson, a GPP.
Yeah.
Sounds crazy, but
Anquan Boldin and Cash. I mean, that's my take on that.
I agree. Anquan Boldin and Cash is definitely there. I would say the toughest thing about it is he definitely has a tough matchup. Sterling Moore is the toughest matchup that he faces. Sterling Moore, he does allow a lot of targets, especially for working in the slot. 20% of routes his receiver is targeted, but he holds them to well under league average in terms of fantasy points per route. So they don't catch a lot of these targets, is what it seems like. So that's the only downside here to Bolden. So I think he makes him a better cash game play than a GPP play. I think there's some downside, and so I kind of just like, I really like this side of the game where you just take the Saints and then run it back with a single Detroit player, whether it's Theo Riddick, Anquan Boldin, Golden Tate, or maybe even the Andre Roberts flyer.
Yeah, good stuff. Mark Ingram also active. We mentioned earlier that both of those backs are probably GPP options, but at different price points and at price points that make them a little bit difficult to get into your lineups when there are a lot of really good options this week. But I actually like Hightower a little bit more is my take on that.
Yeah,
especially considering cost.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a good call. I don't actually have, but like 2% exposure to Ingram and Hightower. I think I have in one single solitary lineup, which is less than 1% exposure.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Any other questions out there? I'm trying to see.
I think that also could make Theo Riddick even more cash game viable as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. Riddick's going to see a lot of work, and yeah, I mean, I think it benefits Ebron too.
Yeah, it definitely benefits Ebron, but I just don't like tight ends where the team could potentially not move the ball, could struggle to score points. And you're laughing at me, not you specifically, but general you is laughing at me because it's the Saints defense and they've allowed over 20 points in almost every game. But I don't, and I think. I mean, read about it at my article, RotoViz. They're getting better, and I think the matchup just isn't perfect for Ebron as well. So, New Orleans isn't that bad against the tight end position. So, I think it's just one of those things. They're like average against the tight end position, and then you have a situation that's not that favorable. I'm especially where it's going to be highly owned. I'm not going to be on Ebron in a GPP.
That's fair. Yeah, the counter argument, at least for cash from me, would be that he's the cheapest exposure to this pass offense. He's even cheaper than Anquan Boldin. So both those guys, I think, are viable in cash in terms of salary savings. So you can get up to the higher price running backs or higher price players, wherever you want to get up to higher price players. I think cash, you're going to get some cheap targets there with Jones out, but.
Yep.
Yeah,
how about wide receivers under 4K besides Andre Roberts? Do you have anybody?
Wide receivers under 4K. Yeah, Dorial Green Beckham at 3,000. Ted Ginn's right at 4,000. He's somebody I'm throwing into a few lineups.
Yeah, I have a few Ted Ginns with my with my Russell Wilson ones.
Yeah. Marquise Wilson's at 4,000.
Under 4.
Yeah, I don't know. I think Doyle Green Beckham at 3,000 is my best receiver under 4.
I can't pull the trigger on him. I just can't.
Probably
Convince me. Convince me.
I mean, it's really just comes down to min salary. Jordan Matthews being out, Nelson Aguilar getting deactivated last week. I think a lot of people think that Zach Ertz is going to be really heavily targeted in this game, but there's a lot of times that we've heard that about Zach Ertz and he doesn't get heavily targeted. It looks like it's supposed to be a pretty close game based on the line. It's not a high game total, but if it is a close game, there's going to be some passing in the second half. Then the Eagles haven't really committed to the run at all anyway. They didn't really commit to the run last week with Wendell Smallwood. They didn't give him as many carries as I kind of thought they might. So I don't know. My take is that they're going to throw, and that for min salary, it's a really fantastic target projection basically at min salary. Like I think you can
Yeah, that's true. That's definitely true. You can project him for 8+ targets, I think.
Yeah, I mean a floor of probably 5 targets, and then that's like the upside. He could get 8+ targets. He's a big receiver too. He's probably going to get red zone targets if they get down there. So I like him.
Yeah, I think that's a good call. I think there's 3 I've looked at, which one is Tyler Lockett in your Cams or in your Russell Wilson stacks. Another is Torrey Smith. Chicago is Tracy Porter's terrible, and so Torrey Smith will be lined up against him some. And then their safeties are also really bad, so they give up a lot of deep balls. So not a lot of Torrey Smith, but I think you can get him in a couple lineups and have some exposure to him there. And the third is Adam Humphries at 3,600 for Tampa Bay. If we like this Tampa Bay San Diego game to shoot out, I think he's certainly in play. His slot matchup there is really good. He gets Trevor Williams in the slot, who has allowed 22% of his receivers' routes to be targeted and 0.3 fantasy points per route. So Adam Humphries is a sneaky play. You can do like a Jameis Evans, Adam Humphries stack and run it back with one of the San Diego guys. That's kind of an appealing GPP option to me. But I only have about 3 or 4 maybe tops Adam Humphries lineups out of over 100. So it's not that much exposure, but I think he's in play.
Yeah, out of those ones you just named, I think Smith would be the one that I like. Torrey Smith is, I think, a pretty good call. Chicago is really bad against the deep ball, so Smith is interesting for sure. Jarvis Landry is the only way Miami moves the ball. I think that's an interesting call. I mean, that's something I've thought about this week as well. If Jay Ajayi has trouble against Baltimore's really good run defense, you could see Landry see a lot of targets. I liked it more when Devontae Parker wasn't going to play. Now it sounds like he's playing. He's been a little bit more ineffective. He's one of those guys that when he's banged up and when he's questionable, he's a little bit more ineffective. Maybe play a little bit timid or something if you want to get on the narrative. But that's kind of my take on him.
Yeah, I like that.
I don't expect him to be a great play this week, but I do think that it could cut into Landry's targets a little bit. But yeah, I think Landry as an extension in the run game, we haven't seen that for a lot of weeks, which is why it's hard for me to trust it. But I do think it could happen this week.
Yeah.
I don't think it's a terrible call.
Yeah, I like that. I think Jarvis Landry, you're right, is probably the only way they move the ball. So, I would say that would make him normally an interesting cash game option, but this week there's just too many good cash game wide receivers that are even cheaper.
Right. I consider him for cash, definitely, and that's just exactly what I came to. What you said. There's better, cheaper options where if you look at Landry's game log the last 5-6 games, he's just not seeing as much volume, and they're winning. So I could totally see a scenario where they continue to try to employ the exact same game plan until they aren't winning any games. I think they've won 5 or 6 straight games. So you got to think about stuff like that too. Picture what incentive does Miami have to change anything when they're on their biggest win streak probably in 4 or 5 years? I mean, I don't know the last time they've won this many games in a row. So
yeah, yep, I think that's definitely fair. So
I think we're kind of closing down though, right?
Yep. I got another show to hop on at the top of the hour, so
okay.
Definitely need to get it wrapped up. But
where can the listeners jump over and hear you?
That will be on the Fantasy Sports Network. It's a Canadian TV show, or internet TV show. So probably they can't unless they're Canadian.
Well, our Canadian listeners are going to be pumped about that.
So that's right. So Fantasy Sports Network. I'll be on like the FST today. They usually do a live show like we do every NFL weekend, and so they asked me to be on this week. So that'll be fun. I like those guys. They're good people.
Awesome, man. Have fun with that. If you're up in Canada, keep a lookout for Nick's spot here in about 10 minutes. But I think that'll do it. For Nick, you can follow him on Twitter at Rotodoc. I'm Benny, and follow me at Yards Per Gretch. Thanks for following along with us, guys, and good luck this week.